Alrighty, TODD HUTCHINGS versus IRAKLI ZIRAKASHVILI. Going into this match, this was very interesting because obviously these guys have pulled before, and the first time they pulled, if I remember correctly, I believe it was a pretty easy victory for TODD HUTCHINGS 3-0. Certainly was not something where it looked like IRAKLI had a lane in which he could have won. It just looked like over time IRAKLI's bicep was going to gas out. TODD HUTCHINGS just has inherently an extremely good style for multiple rounds for endurance because of the fact that he's okay with his wrist going back and the fact that he uses more so side pressure. He uses a lot more structure over his musculature. It's just going to be really, really difficult for any bicep elbow flexor driven top roller to do well against him over multiple rounds. And that's exactly what we saw in their last match. And in these first rounds, this is exactly what we see. TODD HUTCHINGS hits his classic TODD roll where he takes wrist control to a certain degree from his opponents. He also loses his wrist entirely, so he's getting a really good connection through this lower strap into his arm. And using his lat drag and his side pressure, he is attacking IRAKLI ZIRAKASHVILI's bicep. And there's just no way that IRAKLI is going to be able to do anything using that lane. He's not going to defeat TODD HUTCHINGS' side pressure with his bicep. And this is what we see kind of going forward. But then something happens in round either 2 or 3. TODD HUTCHINGS wins the first rounds. And then in either 2 or 3, what we see IRAKLI do is he decides to make a very intelligent move. You wouldn't think that this is the right thing you should do against TODD HUTCHINGS, but he gives up his own wrist. And in doing so, he actually ends up putting TODD HUTCHINGS into a top roll. Now, you would think if you just look at this position, traditional arm wrestling would tell you this is a pretty good position for IRAKLI, and this is not a very good position for IRAKLI. There's a lot of arm wrestlers who would be much better off. If you're TODD HUTCHINGS, a lot of arm wrestlers, say Devin Laird, for example, would much rather be in this position right here than in this position right here. But TODD HUTCHINGS is not one of these people. TODD HUTCHINGS' side pressure is insane, but his elbow flexor is really not all that crazy, especially considering how high he is up in this weight class. So it's much easier to defeat TODD HUTCHINGS from this position than it is from this position. And this is what we see. IRAKLI gives up a lot of his fundamental strengths, but in doing so, he is able to isolate TODD HUTCHINGS' elbow flexor. And as soon as he gets in this position where he is on Todd's bicep, he presses through him very, very easily. So now there's something new. There's a new variation kind of introduced into this match. It's not just IRAKLI's bicep versus Todd's side pressure, but now the match is a technical battle. And it's about, is there a way for TODD HUTCHINGS, or rather, is there a way for IRAKLI ZIRAKASHVILI to access TODD HUTCHINGS' bicep? So then in the next rounds, we see kind of this whole time, and really throughout the entirety of the rest of the super match, IRAKLI is always trying to access that bicep. And TODD does a good job of keeping him just outside that lane. You can see here in this position, IRAKLI's thinking about trying to edge that shoulder forward. He wants to get on the bicep of TODD HUTCHINGS. He's still kind of fighting that side pressure. And you'll even see him kicking his own wrist back on purpose multiple times, kind of baiting TODD into that top roll, but TODD is not allowing that to happen. He's not going to just take wrist control and top roll and pronate, but he's sometimes even forcing his own wrist underneath as well. And what we see in this moment here, it would be tempting to just take what's being given to you and for TODD to just go ahead and top roll right over the top. But this is a trap being set by IRAKLI. And instead of TODD top rolling from this position, you can see his elbow is at the very corner, the right-hand corner of the pad. He actually just shoves all the way. This might be an elbow foul right here, but he just shoves all the way to the other side of the pad. So he decides he doesn't really care about taking hand control, even though it's being gifted to him right here. Instead, he just bumps IRAKLI outside of his shoulder. It became clear that all TODD really had to worry about, as long as the match was somewhat arm on arm, he was going to win. But what he could not allow is for IRAKLI to get into the press position, because then he's going to isolate TODD's bicep. And once the match is about TODD's bicep, TODD drops from probably number 1 in this class to maybe like top 20. His bicep is just not on the same level as his side pressure. So we see him doing this. TODD is really, really concerned about just keeping IRAKLI outside of his shoulder. And he does this very effectively going forward. And we can always see this pattern repeating going into the later rounds. Sometimes TODD will open with his elbow a little bit more on the outside, but he's always being mindful of not allowing his hand position to sweep too far out to the outside, allowing IRAKLI to get his shoulder behind. And you'll see here, and constantly throughout this match, IRAKLI allowing his wrist to go back. He's trying anything he can do to get his shoulder wedged in. And instead of trying to just go through TODD's side pressure, he wants to get around it, and he wants to fight with TODD's bicep instead of that. But as we end up seeing, this doesn't really work out very well for him. He ends up losing every single round after that very first round where he did try the press, and it worked super well. He pressed through TODD's bicep very easily. But once TODD knew that it was coming, he was able to make the adjustments necessary and prevent it going forward. And in the final round, we even see something quite crazy, quite unorthodox from IRAKLI ZIRAKASHVILI. He does go ahead and try to press right off the go, but this does not end up working either. TODD has enough connection here to prevent this from happening. He's able to get enough cup and enough bumping side pressure to get him outside of his shoulder, and IRAKLI cannot quite get that press off of the go. So I found this to be really, really interesting. IRAKLI pulled him the first time. It just looked like he had no answer at all. He just kind of sat there and slowly got bled out on his bicep. But this time around, IRAKLI does have a technical answer. If he can get to that press, it looks like he's going to go through TODD's bicep. But now it's a matter of whether or not he can get to that press in the first place. So these guys have pulled twice now. TODD had a very dominant performance the first time. I would say still a pretty dominant performance the second time, but it was a little bit more risky for him, and there were moments he ended up losing one round on fouls, just trying to prevent IRAKLI from getting to the press. So it was quite a bit closer the second time, and maybe the third time around, if IRAKLI can figure out how to get into that flop press consistently, we might see a different result. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you later.